All right, good evening. It's Jason Grant once again, and tonight I'm speaking to Anushka Sharma. Anushka is an incredible young lady who I had an absolute privilege of meeting last year. Did we meet last year, Anushka?
Yeah, it was a diversity in tech event with
But
the lovely
but it
Ginny and
feels it
Marianne.
it feels for me like I've known you for years because I met you at a conference and we sort of like instantly connected. And I remember writing into your diary, I wrote you a bunch of messages, and it was super cool. And you seem to, since when I met you, you seem to have absolutely lived to those messages. So I feel also double privileged now that I seem to have prophesized a bit of your self reflection into reality. So there, I'm kind of stroking my own ego a little bit from the start. But tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do. I don't like to sort of introduce people because I
Yeah.
always kind of either misinterpreted it or sort of miss out on major important things.
First of all, Jason, thank you so much for having this opportunity to speak with you this evening. There was no hesitation in my mind there was no hesitation about saying yes to this. I literally, as soon as you asked me, I was like, this has to happen. And yeah, so just very quickly, my name is Anushka. Born and raised here in London, daughter of immigrants, grew up in Southwest London. And I guess the only thing I can really say is that I've always been quite curious in life. And I probably haven't tread a path that most people do. That said, I did a computing degree, ended up working in the world of politics. So I've worked on general election campaigns, fell into working on the Olympics, and behind me, you'll see a little memento I picked up from the Olympic Stadium, which is something I worked on in 2012. And after that, I just decided to follow my passions in life. And that was really back into sort of technology. And way back then, like even when I graduated a long time ago, nearly 18 years ago, this tech ecosystem just didn't exist in London. And so I think when you've had a sort of portfolio career where you've jumped from sectors and industries, it's very difficult for people to know what to do with you. And I would say that the moment I met you, it was actually a turning point in my life, and things have been very transformational in my life. And I think I've learned a lot. The universe has kicked me down a lot of times. I've failed. I've fallen flat on my face. But it's brought me to where I am right now, and I'm smiling because I'm actually now doing something that I absolutely love, and I'm very passionate about what I do. And I think that if you follow that feeling, things in life flow, and I'm hopefully on that flow state now. And I think that's something that you reminded me of when I met you. And so it's just so lovely to kind of a year down the line kind of pick back up probably where we left off last time, and maybe fill in some blanks about what I've been doing in space and innovation and just generally kind of hacking my life, I guess.
One thing I have to tell you, and I'm not sure if I've said this explicitly enough in the past, but I'll use this opportunity because this is a little bit of like, what do they call it? Ambient intimacy. Okay, that's the term that they use in information architecture. It's like it feels like we're speaking one to one, right? And maybe nobody is listening, but actually it's fully accessible publicly and forever after. So I'll just make this open admission that I actually find you extremely, extremely inspirational. And I'll tell you exactly reasons why I find you inspirational, because you are a person who is involved in so many different realms that I only really dream about even getting involved in. And then really the way you speak, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but the way you speak is super, super engaging. It's like your tone, your pronunciation, your choice of words. It's just like I could listen to you forever. So that's just completely, just full admission from my end that I find that extremely inspirational myself. And in many respects, I actually look up to you really. And every time I check, every time I check your social media, there's something new, crazy, cool, interesting happening. So tell us what you're working on these days.
So I guess so space has always been something that has fascinated me from when I was a 7-year-old kid, and my aunt from Miami got me a t-shirt that was from Cape Canaveral that said "The future is now." And I remember going as a kid to the Science Museum in London. I was just there on Friday for something really random. Talvin Singh, this most amazing tabla player, was hosting the end of a sort of curated event that's all about illuminating India. And I was like a kid in a candy store because I was walking through the space section and I had Apollo 11, the replica, all to myself. I had Apollo 10 all to myself. I had former pieces of rockets all to myself. And I literally was geeking out by myself in my NASA hoodie on the way to see one of my favorite musicians. And I guess when I talk about flow, I guess that's what I'm talking about, because I'm manifesting everything I want in the way that I would want it to be in the world. Because where else would you get the world of Indian classical music, culture by way of pictures from India, which is where my family background is from, and then being able to walk through like the space section of the Science Museum on a Friday night. So it's kind of, I guess, I don't even know. I can't even describe it, but I just know that when I follow what I'm passionate about, things just join up. But when they don't join up, I just take a step back and really think about what I want. I've started meditating a lot recently, and there's a really cool app that I use. And I've actually just started subscribing to it because I want it online when I'm offline and on the tube. And it's called Insight Timer. And it's amazing. It has like a ton of like guided meditations. You don't actually have to pay for it if you don't want to. And I just find that when I take time to center myself every day, I actually really miss it if ever there's a day that I don't meditate. And I mean, look, I've gone off on a tangent. What was the question again? Like, that's crazy.
What are you working on these days? And there are no tangents, by the way.
Yeah.
It's all integral to our lives and the experience. So yeah.
So I guess I was talking about space and like my passion as a kid. And like, you know, I grew up in Balham, Southwest London. Back in the day, like 20, 30 years ago, living in Balham was not cool. It was probably the most diverse upbringing I've had. Like if you looked at a school photo of me in the 80s, like you can imagine every background here under the sun that really represented the diversity of London that we actually see today too.
Hold on. Are you saying that it's not Balham, the final frontier?
Balham is like, as they say, it's the gateway to the south. But honestly, like I've seen you with your kids at Ernest Bevan College in Tooting, right? And that's like literally down the road. My brothers went there. I went to Burntwood. You know, like growing up here in Southwest London has really shaped me. But imagine like wanting to be an astronaut, right? And coming from like Tooting and Balham, like it's insane to think that that could even happen. But I 3 years ago applied to something with NASA, and it was called NASA Social. And I got chosen, which basically meant I got to go to America, and I was invited to attend the launch of a rocket at Vandenberg Air Force Base. And the rocket was carrying in its cargo a satellite called SMAP, Soil Moisture Active Passive. Now, in the way that the space ecosystem is run, this satellite it took about 20 years before it eventually got launched, because with each subsequent president, you know, they have a different space agenda, things get shelved, and then they come back online when funds become available. But I guess to cut a long story short, this is what made me realize that space is something that I want to like leave my life's work in. Up until that point, I didn't realize that I didn't have to be a rocket scientist to work in the space sector. No one tells you this when you're at school, right? No one's like, oh, Anushka, guess what? You can work in the space sector. Because social media, when I grew up in Tooting, didn't exist, right? Social media wasn't even a thing. I didn't even have an email address until I was 17. Like, it was ridiculous. And I still remember signing up for my first email address, which I still use today. It's so cool. It's a Yahoo email in my old school library in Tooting after I came back to the UK from a summer in the States. And all my family and cousins were raving about email. So I guess what I've realized is that it doesn't matter whether you're a rocket scientist or not, anyone can contribute to the space ecosystem. And in the work that I've done in Europe, working with Disrupt Space, which was a kind of unconference that brought together innovative space startups from all around the world and put them together in a unconference where they could meet the likes of Airbus and ESA and basically work in that fuzzy space of innovation that's otherwise at that time 2 years ago wasn't defined with incubators or accelerators. And there I was talking to this awesome rocket scientist from Australia who's working on this amazing rocket propulsion system that's going to help us with our interplanetary travel, who has the opportunity to test his technology on the International Space Station. And there I was giving them advice about business and strategy and, all these other things where I could add value. And it got me thinking that, we all have complementary skills. And if we look at how technology's disrupted industries today, some of the best innovation has come from people from the left field, joining up with someone in finance, for instance. So that's what really excites me about space. And ultimately, it's something that is there for all of us. We all should have fair and equal access to space. And I'm just really passionate about the innovation and technology that we use to explore the moon and Mars and the moons beyond and the solar system beyond, that technology and that innovation will benefit us on Earth too. So it's a two-way tech transfer. And that's something that I'm now looking to shape at Naaut. So it's very exciting as I'm sort of delving into technology such as blockchain. And I guess I'm just curious, and I'm not shy to admit that I don't have all the answers. And I do say to people now that, you know what, when you see me in 6 months' time, my story may be totally different. And I think that's the kind of thinking that we all need to get at. We're not defined by the job title we have, the company that we work in, the role that we do. It's actually the story of where we are right here and right now, and understand that it changes. I've just ranted for so long. I'm so sorry.
Totally. I'm just been thinking about this and I have to share it. So when somebody asks you, which space are you in? You literally can answer space.
And then I have to point, because I've also worked in building a co-working space in Shoreditch, a 20,000 square foot space. So when you say you work in space and startups, people are like, oh, so you run a co-working space. And I'm like, well, I kind of did do that 3 years ago. But actually, I'm talking about space up there. And I often have to say, yeah, the moon, Mars, and beyond. Yeah, it's kind of funny now.
Yeah, so it's interesting how like every word in English language has like multiple meanings, and those meanings can be tangentially different to one another, where there's like the idea of space, or like if you're playing music in this effortless mastery fashion, you can be playing from space, which is this kind of like just effortless space, which I suppose is the same space as the space out there, but we just kind of, people think of it as empty, but it's not really empty, and all that kind of stuff.
And you see, and I was just going to riff on that and say, well, look at virtual reality and augmented reality and mixed reality. One of my favorite books is Ready Player One, and I've seen the film and it's amazing. No spoilers, but virtual reality and the spaces that we transform our kind of psyche into to explore a digital realm, and artificial space is still space. So, yeah, I find it fascinating.
Yeah, because it's like humans have invented or discovered, I suppose nothing's ever really invented, is discovered this kind of new dimensions of existence. And I've recently written an article about the touches on the idea about that there is an avatar self, right? And that whole Avatar, the movie, is like some conspiracy theorists would say, like, no Hollywood movies are made up stories. They're all real. As I suppose that like Avatar is absolutely real, because it's exploring that space of sort of a virtual reality that is increasingly becoming real reality. And then in a lot of this, you mentioned meditation and sort of the process of self-actualization or individuation. We end up realizing that we need to wake up into our dream. And so there's all these kind of paradoxes. So maybe, I know this is completely random, but talk to me a little bit about paradox of working on things that in the past you thought were completely impossible, yet now you find yourself somewhat shaping.
Yeah, I mean, so in my past life, I've worked on every single election campaign over the past 14 years, apart from the Brexit referendum, because I just didn't believe in the campaign and how it was being run, which is kind of topical, but we'll park that. And then to go off and organize and be involved in the planning and logistics of the opening and closing ceremony of the Olympic Games, and then the athletics and Paralympics as part of the athletics. You know, when I look back at that time in my life, like 6 years plus backwards, I had really intense jobs. And arguably, like, I couldn't have been a more basic version of myself and like the worker bee then that I feel like I've transformed in now, because the lessons of being an entrepreneur or working for yourself and giving up that kind of salaried lifestyle and literally reinventing yourself in what you believe is your inner core and what your passions are has been the hardest thing I've done. And, you know, as I said in my introduction, like, I'm smiling today because I actually now understand the beauty in the failures that I've had. I spent so much time looking for approval from my peers, or, you know, for those retweets, or, you know, that like, or just acceptance by my peers in the world that I was trying to find a place in. And it's only really been recently where I'm putting out content, and you know what, if it gets one like, I don't care. The content is out there. Whereas I guess the person who was so diligently in social media previously, I always cared about like how many likes and impressions, but now I feel like there's a deficit of so much content that I haven't shared with the world, that now I'm just kind of like genuinely just looking to get these messages out. Because when you meet people that can be part of your tribe and you connect with them, you know, technology is a great equalizer in democratizing access to people and good people. And obviously, face-to-face meetings are really where the magic happens. But without this technology today, on a Tuesday evening, we would have to be somewhere maybe in central London. There would maybe be an audience of maybe, hopefully, more than 20 people in a room with us who'd have to have spent their time after work to travel to us. But right now, I can be in the comfort of my office, you can be at home, and hello to everyone watching who's taken the time to like tune in or watch back later, because that's what we now have. And I would say a lot of the old ego of Anushka, who kind of climbed those ladders, has gone. And I truly am now all about things that drive me and what make me happy and what fulfill me. And I'm all about impact oriented outcomes, and knowing that any project I've ever worked on, hand on my heart, is something that I believe has contributed some value to the world. And if not today, it's something that will come back in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And when you're talking about space and human exploration, and maybe not, there's a whole new prize that Google has just launched, and it's called the Anna Avatar Prize. And it is all about creating an avatar that will help us with our rogue future explorations of, yes, the solar system, but it could equally be the seas beneath us. You know, it's a really exciting time to be alive in the timeline of humanity. And I count my blessings for that every day, because the access that we have to technology and people, you know, we only hold ourselves back. Nothing is impossible. And I'm an incredibly shy person, believe it or not. I'm actually quite introverted, but I force myself to do things to push myself. And like, yeah, like sitting here and I'm talking to you, but like there's a part of me inside that genuinely just wants to hide behind a pillow right now. But I'm forcing myself to get out there, because if we don't get out there, then things like this don't happen. You know?
It's interesting you mention these kind of notions of forcing yourself and wanting to hide, because, you know, again, when we do this kind of very, very deep introspection work or inner standing, we come to realization that, you know, it's like one of the scientific theories, right, is the theory of Big Bang, which I know a lot of physicists have kind of already discarded. But the idea of Big Bang is like everything comes out of nothing. So that nothingness is like a previous state to everything. And so there is nowhere to hide. There is nowhere to hide. And what are you hiding from? Because nothing is everything, and these kind of strange loops and paradoxes exist throughout the universe. And this kind of what you're talking about is previous life, past life, and now life, which we fully understand as to what you're talking about. Yet, at the face of it, it's like, what are you talking about, previous life? So this kind of fades ups of self-consciousness, self-awareness, as they happen, we suddenly like break out, like experience this big bang into a new realm of existence, and there is actually no need to force anything, because you are the force. You are everything. And so it's really, what are you focusing on and what are you manifesting, because your perceptions create reality at the small r, not the big reality. And so those are kind of all paradoxes that we've managed to sort of synthesize into one. And then when you look back or retrospect, time doesn't exist, but let's say retrospecting is looking back into whatever. Effectively, it's like time is a series of parallel universes strung together into one sort of linear playthrough. And so when you look back at the previous parallel universes that you traversed through, what you're doing today is you're synthesizing everything that you have created in the past, and all of it is absolutely perfectly relevant to who you are today. And you've absolutely perfectly created yourself and are perfectly creating yourself into the future, with the purpose that you may or may not realize is there. End of sort of mini kind of rant there. But
no, that's like mind blown. Wow, that's such a way to
and so like these kind of things, for example, before I did programs like Fresh Mind, which we now, you know, coach people through to realize these things, I found it necessary to be kind of preparing for things. You know, it's like, I need to kind of like really write out what I'm going to say, blah, 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 because unless I kind of rehearse it and so on, it won't work. It's like the only time when something's not going to work is when you doubt yourself. As soon as a modicum of doubt comes into your mind, body, soul, or any kind of aspect of yourself, things start kind of cranking up like an engine that's, you know, not oiled well. And as soon as you remove any form of doubt, which is perfectly possible, you enter that flex flow state, which is recognized in integral theory as such. Flex flow, continuous flow, not something that you require to drink like a bulletproof coffee exactly at 5 minutes to 6 in the morning. And if you miss it, like the whole thing is like messed up, and you have to roll back 4 weeks in the past and kind of chuck away all your supplements and buy new ones, and none of that nonsense, right? It's like you're in flex flow all the time, because that's how the space works. Yeah. So talk to us some more about space. Why are you interested in the space?
So I think humans were explorers. If we had never decided to tackle climbing Mount Everest, it would just be the highest mountain in the Himalayas. You know, if we didn't think to explore the oceans, we wouldn't have learnt certain things about the cracks in the ocean floor, or the organisms that survive in environments that we would otherwise not have even thought possible on Earth. And I think to have this outwards view of life beyond just being a species on planet Earth is something that, you know, when I said that this point in time, the way that technology has brought us to where we are right now, we're at this integral point where technology has enabled an acceleration of us as people and the sort of knowledge we have access to. And this is before I even talk about like the consciousness of computers, for instance. But we've enabled things to happen that allow us to live longer. You know, the average person is probably going to live to 100 and over 100, let's say that. Let's not give it an actual number. And isn't that fascinating that within a generation, we've already increased life expectancy? But just because we're living for longer, it doesn't mean that we can't be achieving things. And even, I mean, Buzz Aldrin, he even says that he'd be more than happy to go to Mars and take all his learnings. And he's actually created a hologram with a really cool company who is talking about exploring Mars and beyond. And the way that we can capture his insights today to share with future generations is awesome. But I just think that it would be an incredibly sad state of affairs if we as a species didn't look beyond the bounds of Earth and the moon and maybe potentially Mars. But I genuinely will say one thing. I want us to respect space and the environment and any place in our interplanetary journey that we set foot on, because we can't do what we've done to Earth. You know, the state of where we are with climate change and all of these other factors, plastic in water and in fish's bellies. I just hope that by being part of this kind of conversation and working towards what I want to achieve in sort of the ecosystem and the supply chain in space, that we respect it, but also make it accessible to everyone. So it doesn't matter if in 20 years' time you grow up in a council estate in Tooting, you have the exact same access to space as someone who had the opportunity to go to university, or a kid who grew up in a rural in the rural countryside in India, because space is and should be there for everybody. So there is so much wrapped up in this. And there is still so much to unravel, but we have to talk about it. And I have to start talking about it, because if I'm not talking about it, I'm not going to meet people that I can work with on hoping to affect the kind of the future, like you said, manifest what we want to see in the world. And, you know, I meet these amazing startups, but in the ecosystem of the space supply chain, if you're creating a rocket propulsion system that's for interplanetary travel, well, at the moment you have the space agencies really at the top of the chain. And then you've got people like SpaceX and Elon Musk with the transportation systems that they're looking to build. Before we even get to the rocket propulsion, a whole ecosystem has to develop. And I just want to be there as part of it. And that's for me where blockchain comes in. And that's something that I've just happened to be deep diving on over the last couple of months. And, you know, I just think that being able to have, whether it's people or companies as part of this ledger who are working together on projects that wouldn't necessarily come together, and you're authenticating pieces of a puzzle of a tiny bit of chip, for instance. But even that, if you unravel that, there is so much in that's why blockchain fascinates me. I genuinely worry about the supply of electricity to charge these servers that are going to be keeping all of these blocks of data as part of this immutable ledger transaction system. It fascinates me.
Yeah, it's like I've been intensely studying the whole blockchain space now for a bunch of months, and when I say intensely, I like, you know, it's like sometimes sleepless nights reading things and really watching presentations that are delving deep into it, and that resulted in us creating a integral blockchain startup incubator and really looking into the core maths of it's like I'm still struggling to explain it properly, but it's like, what is the minimum amount of effort that is required to store a unit of data with least amount of work, right? And then be able to distribute that across the planet, and then this universe in a integral way, while respecting the universal laws and principles that we can't sort of get away from. And that's where, weirdly enough, the space kind of correlates to blockchain, in the sense that blockchain, to the best of our knowledge and ability so far, is like the technology that's truly looking at a planetary level services, and then interplanetary level services, because then, like, if we solve for this planet, we can then solve for another planet, and so on. And then when it starts thinking and taking into account the whole concept of like modules and little units that make up bigger machines and Internet of Things and things that are trackable and that produce data, and that for that data, especially in sort of rockets and things like that, data is super, super important, because from that people learn and so on. I have a friend, actually, this is going slightly on tangent. A friend of mine works as a consultant, who works as a person who detunes plane engines, because plane engines are apparently made out of 20,000 pieces, and all of them have to oscillate at a slightly different frequency, where we talk about coming into synchronicity with another person and getting more harmonious with one another. He talks about detuning every piece, because if the pieces come into harmony, they start kind of oscillating at a high frequency, and they causes the engine to blow up. And his job is to detune every single unit that makes up that engine, and make sure that they never can come into synchronicity. But imagine putting all of those onto blockchain, and all of them sort of streaming data at all times, and that being immutably captured. Those are kind of problems that we're looking at solving from maths upwards into code. And then all these kind of use cases start becoming relevant, and our ability to think really not just planetary level but interplanetary is of paramount importance. Tell me other ways in which you are like exploring blockchain, and what you're finding out, what's interesting you, and how you maybe see yourself being involved with it and in it going forward.
So I actually went to a developer conference this weekend, and it really laid out from a sort of ground level up the history of blockchain. And obviously I've read the beautiful 9-pager Bitcoin white paper that Satoshi Nakamoto wrote. And actually I was incredibly lucky to be in a room with the Square co-founder and founder of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, who kind of echoes my thoughts on it. You know, there is a beauty in these abstracts of the future that we want to create with this technology. And for me, I'm still looking at how I can look at the technology of blockchain to test it. And I've actually been reading a lot of the different white papers as a subsequent of the event on Saturday. And I actually wrote a blog post about it, which I published yesterday. And one of them is the Polkadot paper, which was written by Dr. Gavin Wood, who was a founder of Ethereum and Parity. And again, like you said, it's all about a different model of how you store the data, how someone else verifies that or takes a stake. You know, all of these things, when you describe them in plain English, they totally make sense. but the use case in a much more simplified way is, I think, in any kind of tech startup way of thinking things through, I have to MVP it, minimal viable product. And I think it's literally going to start as simple as network design. And I know that that's something that you're also very interested in, because for me, like, design thinking and network is fascinating to me. And I often call myself a rogue purely because of the fact that I kind of move pretty seamlessly from one sector to another, from one industry. And I can be talking to the CEO of a Fortune 500 company 1 minute and quite happily talking to someone who has just joined a startup as an intern, or talking to my 90-year-old neighbor Betty and just catching up with her, and she thinks I should be a magistrate. So I just think that the kind of people we come into contact with, the interactions we have to have a diversity of thought, we have to have a diversity of experience, and we have to have a diversity of, I guess, even social status, because until we encompass a whole 360 vision, and I think that's really the metaphor of what blockchain represents of everything ultimately, it scares me, because I've heard people talking about putting servers on the moon to keep them cool enough to deal with the flow of data that we're going to need as it's going across these peer-to-peer global networks. You know, there is so much that needs to be solved, but in talking about this with someone this weekend, they were basically like, so it's basically going to be a relational database. And I'm like, yeah, that's basically what blockchain is right now. So all I'm going to be creating as my MVP for blockchain is a relational database. I was doing that like when I was doing my A-level in computing back in the day. So I think keeping things on a really simple level first and really seeing how it could potentially scale is what I'm going to be doing probably over the next couple of weeks. The networking community that I'm now looking to build in London, I've been very much Brexit proofing my strategy, because I've been doing a lot of work in the European tech space ecosystem with startups in Estonia and Germany. And I'm now relearning who the players are in the space community here in the UK. And I think being able to shift and pivot and be resilient and move quite quickly is something that I like to do. So today we might be talking about this MVP in a blockchain or / relational database that underlines a startup space community. Tomorrow, I might have developed that into an incubator and be building a fund that's investing in these startups who may be doing the next step of a blockchain technology or application that actually I see as redundant if I were to do it, because there's a team of experts already doing it. And I think that's what I like to do. I like to pool resources and actually just support people that are doing something to the best of their ability, because there's no point in replicating unless you can act as an agent to help influence or bring a nugget of something that shifts perspective. But if I knew how to monetize that, I'd be a millionaire by now. So I kind of always call this a soft KPI. I find myself as being that agent in that fuzzy space in innovation that brings people together, asks the right questions. And also, it's never about technology for the sake of technology or doing something because that's the buzzword of the moment. It has to fit to whatever the plan is at that moment in time. And if not, there is a reason why you've gone down a different path. But it's being able to remember the reason of why you pivoted in the first place. And that's where I'm finding visual note-taking, like, insanely, like, and I think that's your influence, Jason. Like, I genuinely feel that's your influence. Like, I think I remember Ginny Can Breathe, Virginia, I've forgotten her, Salah, who on her Periscope or Snapchat, no, it was Snapchat, posted you at her flat where you'd drawn out something, and it was all about design thinking. And literally, I think 2 or 3 days later, I bumped into you at an event with them. And I think that's something that's always stayed with me. And drawing things out, when I was in school, I was never seen to be a creative person because I couldn't draw. Like, I wasn't an artist. I couldn't replicate a beautiful painting of an apple. I just wasn't artistic. And I think that's where the education system sometimes lets us down, because there's a wealth of creativity in all of us. It's just manifests in different ways. And my kind of sweet spot is really, I guess, creative thinking. And I'm always curious, and I'm always making connections across things that wouldn't naturally normally fit together or come together. Yeah, I don't even know if that answers your question.
It's very fascinating to know that there is a sort of synthesis going on. I'll just put you on mute because I get a little bit of feedback while I'm saying this. There is always synthesis going on between different things that seemingly seem disparate in their purpose and nature, but actually they can be synthesized later on down the line. And in integral theory, this is described as universe is made out of perspectives. And when you're wanting to work on bigger things, you have to transcend and include whatever was previously there. So you have to rise above. This is why in English language also they say you need to get over yourself, meaning you've got to grow up effectively. A lot of people will talk about don't ever grow up, but the right advice ought to be that you have to grow up while preserving your inner child in the right state, because children are very great at drawing things and not caring as to what it looks like. My daughter Layla will draw on a balloon and she draws like amazing character, and we look at it and go like, I just love this, and like sort of buy this as an artwork. And to her, it's just like, what's the big deal, right? So universe is made out of perspectives, and there is nothing really that's exclusive of each other. It's like everything somehow includes. It's just that our minds can't necessarily kind of comprehend it, and these seem to be radically opposite views, whereas somehow they merge together at some point. And I'm finding that people that I'm really drawn to nowadays are people who are exactly not afraid to state the fact that they're into blockchain space, innovation, connecting startups, startup hubs across Europe, involved in Olympic Games, involved in politics, involved in, listening to their neighbor saying to them that they should be a magistrate. Please don't be a magistrate. So that's really what it's about, because if we hear and listen to all those signals, we will, it's like one of my favorite films is Contact, that's written by Carl Sagan, that I grew up listening to, so Contact is amazing, and it's like the listening to the signals from space. When we hear that, that's where we have the opportunity to learn something radically new. So that was again like my little rant. Please unmute yourself and tell me whatever comes to your mind now. There's no questions.
I love Carl Sagan. And I think as someone who was working at NASA, and for the kind of books he wrote and kind of beautiful pieces of literature, you could call it, I think there's probably a snobbery around people talking about space and wanting to be taken seriously, and then talking about sci-fi. But if you look at what we've learned from science fiction, I feel like where we are now with technology has caught up with all the amazing, imaginative writers who were, writing about Star Trek and Star Wars back in the day. And there is a book or a series that I've just started to read, and it's the Foundation series, and it was written by, and I'm gonna totally not remember the name, and I can't see the bookshelf.
Arthur C. Clarke.
But it's a Foundation book series, and I heard about it from I think it was an interview that Elon Musk gave, and
yeah,
I found
Arthur C. Clarke.
Yeah, and I find it fascinating that even figures like Elon Musk, who are building companies like SpaceX that are in essence transportation facility for interplanetary travel and just providing the access to the International Space Station and deliveries, that the things that have shaped him in where he is today come from books that were written as science fiction. One of my favorite books that I've just finished reading is by Andy Weir, the chap who wrote The Martian. It's called Artemis, and it's a book that's all about humans when we've colonized the moon. And if you watch the film The Martian, Andy Weir worked like very closely with NASA to ensure that the science behind what was actually shown was as close to the reality of the, I guess, simulation that it could be if that actually did happen. And it's pretty much the same case for Artemis if you're looking at humans colonizing the moon. And the moon really could be the gateway to our further interplanetary missions. ESA have been working on a project and talking about something called the Moon Village. I was at this awesome event last week where there is a kind of a chief artist, like an artist in residence at ESA, who has designed a temple on the moon. Like, how beautiful is it that organizations that are space agencies that you would only think are about the International Space Station and the moon and, training up astronauts like Tim Peake for their 6-month rotations on the International Space Station, are working with artists who are thinking about the things that make us human once we have taken those next steps. And what is it to be human? Yes, we want to explore, but once we're on the moon or once we are on Mars, what are the things that we're going to miss? Well, vegetation isn't going to be there. We're not going to have an atmosphere you can just go outside and feel the sun on your face because of radiation and gravity being different. You will have to be in a protective suit. If we're on the moon, gravity has a different effect, and a little jump on Earth will be quite boring, but on the moon, we could really be like jumping all over the place. Things are going to change, and as we evolve with that, and I guess, if we do end up colonizing Mars eventually, however long in the future that might be, really we'll have the first Martian human race, and we don't know the effects on our DNA and exposure to radiation. And the astronaut Scott Kelly they just launched another report about, and I'm going to get the bit wrong, but at the end of your DNA, on your chromosomes, there are these things that begin with T, and this is so embarrassing that I don't remember, but they thought that if they were
telomeres,
that's it. So if they thought that being in space for a long period of time, if they unraveled that was a bad thing. Actually, his did loosen, but actually it created lots of positive effects that we as scientists weren't even expecting to understand. And he was saying in his book that it was fascinating to understand that certain genes could switch on and off in space that weren't necessarily initiated on Earth. So there is so much that we still don't know about what it's going to be like as humans in long-term space flight. But I just really hope that when we really think about what it's like to be human and the little things that we take for granted on Earth, how do we make sure that piece of humanity as we traverse the universe is something that we take with us, but whilst respecting the new planets or the new homes that we make for ourselves, because nothing is ever going to be like Earth as it is today. And nothing will be like being on Mars and being the first crew on the planet, knowing that you've left your family behind. Those are things that you have to really think about. And that's separate to this whole business of space. But I think that they're all questions that we need to think about together. As much as you might want to be the first entrepreneur on Mars and, you know, be the first Wi-Fi provider to beam your message back to Earth. And remember, that takes 20 minutes to go there, like to send a message from Earth to Mars and then from Mars back to Earth. And then it depends on the orbit and where you are around the sun. So, you know, all of these challenges are things that whoever is going to be that crew, they're all things that they're going to have to adapt. And I guess a lot of people are asking themselves if that's something they would ever be willing to give up. And people often ask me, would I go to like Mars? And I always say this, never say never, but until I've explored every corner of Earth and I'm satisfied that I've seen and touched and felt every human experience I can have on this planet, of course I want to go to moon and like the moon and see Earth. Like I just want to enable the next generation to make those steps forward if it doesn't happen in my lifetime. Yeah.
So one thing that comes to mind here is Bruce Lipton has written a book called Biology of Belief, which seems to suggest that it's what we think that drives the behavior of our cells, and cells are not really pre-programmed to do things, but they respond to the environment, which goes in line with this telomeres unraveling in space. Because the environment has changed, and therefore our DNA starts adapting to that, and our cells start adapting to that new state, really, the circumstances, and that's what would also like account for the kind of how evolution works. As environment and conditions change, cells start adapting to that environment and start playing out a different role. So all these things kind of become unified in the sense of mind over matter. Yeah, that what's kind of like a statement in psychology, which is relevant to all of these things. Okay, so as we start wrapping up slowly, I want to read something out to you and have you comment, because I realized I thought like I wasn't really into space that much, but then I remembered that I was. So what's your thoughts on Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
Can you believe I've never read it?
Okay, good, because I'm going to read you something now that is going to, you know, Douglas Adams said, everything is relative, only the guide is absolute. And so he wrote finally here, he said, and I'm going to try and do this in some sort of radio voice because this is just a short paragraph, just for the fun of it. There is a theory which states that if ever anyone discovers exactly what the universe is for and why it's here, it will instantly disappear and be replaced by something even more bizarre and inexplicable. There is another which states that this has already happened. What do you think has happened so far? Has that like inexplicable, bizarre change happened and state change happened already? Or are we going to find out what the universe is about and it will be swapped with something even more bizarre?
I would like to think that we haven't reached that point of singularity yet. So there is this moment in time where we still are almost at that boundary of really understanding what makes us humans as a species. And I think all these difficult conversations that we're having around ethics and data and our place and, you know, who we are as people, sharing our information, I think we're in an amazing point of transformation. And don't even get me going on transhumanism and, you know, becoming a cyborg. You know, all of these things are already happening and have been happening for quite some time. So I am excited, and I'm open. I'm just open to learn, and I'm just open to be curious and see what what we uncover next?
You know, I was on a Skype conversation. I'm going to be bragging a little bit now. I was on a Skype conversation with Natasha Vita Moore for an hour the other day.
Amazing.
And we were talking about the idea of integrating fresh mind into the Transhuman Manifesto.
Wow.
Because of the idea that mind over matter, you know, it's like you start with the mind first and then build everything else out from there, rather than sort of augment the body first and then fix the mind to kind of adapt and adopt that. So
consciousness is such a interesting conversation, but that I think is for a whole other day, because that sort of opens a whole nother level. And I think that's where that singularity comes in of artificial intelligence and robots having this consciousness that potentially supersedes human intelligence. And I think that is a point that, yes, we are close to it, and some people are already saying that we've already surpassed it. I'd like to think that there are still some ethics and work to be done to shape that, because it's a conversation that should involve all of us. Whether you're my 90-year-old neighbor or an intern at a startup or just little old me from Southwest London, you know, we're all involved in that conversation.
Yeah, there's so many trends happening as well. I see some of the guys on Facebook that I'm connected to, not meaning like men, but guys in general, like girls and guys, and you know, they're sort of going back to sort of shamanic ways, but to me that makes sense insofar that like shamans are much closer to the earth, right, and being in tune and in harmony and synchronicity with the earth. And at Integral, the company here, we're talking about a 5P strategy towards building any type of future sustainable company, which is about planet, purpose, people, products, and profits in that order. It's like a planet-centric design.
Love that.
So let's leave it at that, shall we? Thank you so much. Thank you so much for jumping on this call. And I think we managed to lay down some pretty cool pieces of content there. I suppose we could go over this and kind of derive a bunch of blog posts out of it. And who knows who's going to see it in future. We could share it with Elon Musk and maybe even Jeff Bezos, because he seems to be like wanting to take a piece of that space. Pun intended.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.